Omaha, Nebraska, June 26, 1977. The Civic Auditorium is packed with 8,000 fans who have no idea they're about to witness something that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. On stage, a 42-year-old Elvis Presley sits alone at a white grand piano, his hands trembling slightly as they find the opening chords of Unchained Melody. This moment, captured forever on bootleg recordings and shaky home movies, would become one of the most heartbreaking pieces of film in music history. Not because of what Elvis sings, but because of what he knows that his audience doesn't. In 7 weeks, Elvis Presley will be dead. And somehow, sitting at that piano in Omaha, pouring his soul into the most vulnerable performance of his career, he seems to know it. This is the story of Elvis's final live performance. The hidden truth behind why he chose to sing Unchained Melody that night. And the devastating secret that makes this moment not just legendary, but prophetic. Because what the audience saw as a beautiful surprise was actually something much more profound. A goodbye disguised as a gift. A final confession dressed up as entertainment. And a man's last attempt to leave something pure and honest in a world that had consumed everything else he had to give. To understand the magnitude of what happened in Omaha, you have to understand the state Elvis was in during the summer of 1977. Physically, emotionally, and spiritually, the man who had once seemed invincible was falling apart in ways that his closest friends found terrifying. The tours that had once energized him had become ordeals of physical pain and emotional exhaustion. His weight fluctuated wildly as prescription medications battled against the demands of performance schedules that would have challenged a healthy 20-year-old, let alone a man in his 40s struggling with multiple health problems. But perhaps more devastating than his physical decline was his spiritual exhaustion. Elvis had spent 23 years being Elvis Presley, carrying the weight of being a cultural icon, a business empire, and a symbol of American music. The burden had become unbearable. He was tired, recalled Charlie Hodge, who performed with Elvis for years and was one of his closest friends. Not just physically tired, but tired in his soul. Tired of being Elvis Presley. The 1977 tour was supposed to be a comeback, a chance for Elvis to prove that reports of his decline had been exaggerated. But instead of revitalizing him, each performance seemed to drain him further, as if he was giving away pieces of himself that he could never get back. By the time the tour reached Omaha, Elvis was operating on pure willpower and professional obligation. He was fulfilling contracts, honoring commitments, and trying to give his audiences the experience they had paid for, even though it was killing him. But that night in Omaha, something changed. Nobody knows exactly what prompted Elvis to walk over to the white grand piano that had been placed on stage as a prop. It wasn't part of the planned set list. He hadn't rehearsed Unchained Melody with the band. The decision appears to have been completely spontaneous, triggered by something in the moment that only Elvis understood. He just stopped the show, remembered guitarist James Burton. We were in the middle of the regular program, and suddenly Elvis walked over to the piano and sat down. We had no idea what he was doing. What Elvis was doing was preparing to give his audience and the world something he had never given before: complete vulnerability. Unchained Melody was not a typical Elvis song. Unlike the rock anthems and romantic ballads that had made him famous, this was a song of pure longing, written for people who understood what it meant to be separated from everything they loved. It was a song about prisoners, about soldiers, about anyone who felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control. It was, in other words, the perfect song for a man who had become a prisoner of his own fame. But choosing the song was only the beginning. The way Elvis performed it that night revealed something about his emotional state that would remain hidden until after his death, when the full extent of his personal struggles became public knowledge. From the first notes, it was clear that this wasn't a performance in the traditional sense. This was confession, therapy, and goodbye, all wrapped into 4 minutes of the most honest music Elvis had ever made. His voice, which had been showing signs of strain throughout the tour, suddenly found a clarity and power that surprised everyone who heard it. But more than the technical quality was the emotional transparency. Every word seemed to carry personal meaning. Every pause suggested thoughts too painful to express directly. When Elvis sang, "Are you still mine?" the question seemed to encompass everything he had lost or was afraid of losing. His health, his career, his sense of purpose, his connection to the people who loved him. The vulnerability in his voice was so complete that audience members later said they felt like they were intruding on a private moment. But the most devastating moment came during the bridge, when Elvis's voice cracked slightly on the word lonely. It was a small imperfection that revealed the enormous emotion he was trying to contain. For just an instant, the mask slipped completely, and the audience saw not Elvis Presley the performer, but Elvis Presley the man. Exhausted, isolated, and desperately trying to connect with something real. The bootleg recordings of that performance, which have circulated among Elvis fans for decades, capture not just a song, but a moment of raw human truth that is almost unbearable to witness. You can hear the pain in every note, the exhaustion in every breath, the goodbye in every phrase. What the audience didn't know, what nobody knew at the time, was that Elvis's decision to perform Unchained Melody that night was connected to events in his personal life that had pushed him to an emotional breaking point. 3 weeks earlier, Elvis had received devastating news about his health that his inner circle had agreed to keep secret. The details would remain private until long after his death. But the impact on Elvis was immediate and profound. For the first time in his adult life, he was forced to confront the possibility that his time was running out. The knowledge changed everything about how he approached his performances. Instead of going through the motions of being Elvis Presley, he began using his shows as opportunities to say things he might not have another chance to say. Unchained Melody became his vehicle for expressing feelings that he couldn't articulate any other way. The song's themes of separation, longing, and the passage of time spoke directly to his own experience of feeling disconnected from the world around him, despite being surrounded by people at all times. But there was another layer to his choice of song that wouldn't become clear until years later, when the full story of Elvis's final weeks was finally revealed. In the days before the Omaha concert, Elvis had been having conversations with close friends about his legacy, about what he wanted to be remembered for, about the music that truly mattered to him. Unchained Melody had come up repeatedly in these discussions as a song that represented the kind of emotional honesty that Elvis felt had been missing from much of his later career. He talked about wanting to do something real, recalled Joe Esposito, Elvis's tour manager and close friend. Something that wasn't about the image or the persona, but about the music itself. He wanted people to hear him, not just Elvis Presley. The Omaha performance of Unchained Melody was Elvis's attempt to give his audience that experience of hearing him rather than just seeing the Elvis Presley show. The impact on the audience was immediate and profound. The 8,000 people in the Civic Auditorium fell into complete silence during the performance, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. When the song ended, the applause was sustained and emotional. But there was also something else in the air, a sense that something significant had just occurred. even if nobody could articulate exactly what it was. It felt like he was saying goodbye, recalled audience member Nancy Klein, who was 24 years old when she attended the concert. I didn't understand it at the time, but looking back, it really felt like he was trying to tell us something important. What Elvis was trying to tell them, it turns out, was that beneath all the spectacle and celebrity, there was still a man who could be moved by beautiful music, who could connect with his audience through pure emotion, and who understood that the most powerful performances come from the most vulnerable places. The Omaha Unchained Melody would prove to be Elvis's final attempt to reach that level of artistic honesty in a live performance. The remaining concerts on the tour were competent and professional, but they lacked the transcendent quality of that moment at the piano. 7 weeks later, on August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found dead at Graceland. The official cause was heart failure, but the real cause was the accumulated weight of being Elvis Presley for 23 years without ever getting to be just Elvis Aaron. In the immediate aftermath of his death, the Omaha performance took on an almost mythical quality among Elvis fans. The bootleg recordings were copied and shared. The grainy video footage was treasured like sacred artifacts, and the story of Elvis's final song became part of the legend. But it wasn't until years later, when more details about Elvis's final weeks became public, that the true significance of the Omaha performance became clear. Elvis hadn't just chosen to perform Unchained Melody on a whim. He had chosen it as a way of sharing something essential about himself with his audience before it was too late. He had somehow sensed that his time was running out and had used that precious time to create one moment of complete artistic truth. The performance that seemed spontaneous was actually the most carefully considered gift Elvis could have given his fans. A glimpse of the man behind the myth, the artist behind the entertainer, the human being behind the icon. When you listen to the Omaha Unchained Melody today, you're not just hearing a song. You're hearing a farewell, a confession, and a reminder that even the most larger-than-life figures are, in the end, human beings with human hearts that can break. The tragedy isn't just that Elvis died 7 weeks later. The tragedy is that it took until his final performance for him to feel safe enough to share his complete self with the world. For 23 years, he had been giving audiences what they wanted. In Omaha, for 4 minutes and 37 seconds, he finally gave them what they needed. The last song Elvis Presley ever performed live wasn't one of his hits or one of his signature numbers. It was a song about longing, about separation, about the pain of being disconnected from the things you love most. It was, in other words, the song of his life. And he sang it beautifully, with all the vulnerability and honesty that had been building up inside him for decades, finally finding its way to the surface in a moment when he knew it might be his last chance to be real. The man who had given the world so much music, so much joy, so much excitement, saved the most precious gift for last, the gift of seeing him exactly as he was, without the protective layers that fame had required him to wear. In Omaha, Nebraska, on June 26, 1977, Elvis Presley stopped being a performer and became a human being sharing his heart with 8,000 strangers who had come to see a show and ended up witnessing something sacred. It was his greatest performance because it was his most honest. It was his final gift because he somehow knew it would be his last chance to give it. And it was perfect because, after 23 years of being Elvis Presley for everyone else, he finally got to be Elvis Aaron for himself. The Unchained Melody was his own.